Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to create a very simple SSH Honeypot on an Azure virtual machine, and thereafter, if you're interested, I'll show you other videos of how do you display them on Power BI and on SQL itself. If you're interested to find out more, keep watching the video. Now, the first thing which we want to do, for this guy is to create a virtual machine on Azure itself. For this case, I'll be using an Ubuntu server version 18, and I'll quickly walk you through some of the configurations that I'll be using, and what are some of the considerations where I'm setting some of this configuration. I'll go ahead and create a new resource group, so thereafter, if you're happy with the project, it's very easy for you to just clear everything. Right, so I'll usually call it something like to be deleted RG. Okay, hit OK, and then give your virtual machine a name. To be deleted VM. And for the next region, you want to select something which is nearest to you. Okay, so for me, I'm residing in Singapore, so I'll be selecting Southeast Asia. I'll leave availability options as default, and the image as Ubuntu server version 18. I'll be using a slightly small instance, which is the Azure B series. Do note that B series, while very affordable, they work on a time slicing manner. So 100% of the time, you have to slowly accumulate credits. Which means to say there's a specific amount of percentage per month that you can run your virtual machine at 100% CPU. But most of the time it will be throttled anywhere from 5% to 20% based on the series of virtual machine. If you're interested about B series virtual machine, do go and read up the documentations. So for administrator account, it's always a bad idea to use password. But since I'm going to run SSH Honeypot, I'm going to use password. So username, it can never be root. Later I'll show you exactly why it should never be root. Password, give it a fairly complex password. Let me try to retype this again. And I will need to allow SSH port. Next for this, I will select something like standard SSD. Networking wise, by default port 22. Probably I would like to have a different port as well, but I will add it slightly later during the configuration. So these I'll leave it as default. The rest under management, I'll leave it as default as well. Same for advanced, your text, and then you will start to review and create. So next part, it will validate the values that you have entered, and then send the command to Azure to create a virtual machine based on the specs that you have mentioned. So I'll go ahead and create. Thereafter, it will give you a progress update on your deployment. Just give it a while. Once it's successfully created, you should be able to just link directly to your resource. So over here, give me an IP address. I'll just go ahead and copy this. For SSH, you can either use PuTTY or you can use something called the Windows Terminal. If you're interested to find out more about Windows Terminal, or you'd like to download it, you can head over to the website over here. So I'll just go ahead, open up a Windows Terminal. I'll go ahead and say I want to SSH. I'll type in my username, give it the IP address which I've pasted, and then hit enter. By default, it's going to use port 22. So ask, is its nature okay? I'll type in the password. And there we are in. Let's try again. Yep. Nope. Let's try that again. And yes, we are in. So the project that we're gonna use, is based on a GitHub project, which is over here. right? You can go to the first repository to clone it later. But for our configuration on the virtual machine, okay, we need to change the port. By default, SSH is on port 22. Okay, what we want to do is that we want to change it to a different port, so that eventually, when I still need to administer my virtual machine, I will not be hitting the botnet, the honeypot. Okay, so the first thing would be for me to change the configuration on the SSH config. So if you're familiar with Vim, you can use Vim. For me, I'll be using Nano. Okay, I'll just go ahead and change the configuration. Look for ports, okay, and change it to a port which you're familiar with. For me, just for demonstration, I'll use something like 5678. Okay, exit it and do a save. Okay, once you're done with this, if you were to restart your SSH service, you no longer listen to port 22. So if I do a service SSH restart, this should kick me out. And if I try to sign in back to the same machine, okay, SSH Azure user @ let me quickly copy, okay, and then paste. Okay, it says connection refused. Right. So instead, I'll need to go and sign in through port 5678. Okay, but if you realize this by default is not open as a network security group on Azure itself. So if I want to, I'll need to go back to Azure under networking. Okay, under the inbound rule, add a new inbound rule which allows port 5678. So I'll say, okay, source port will be any, destination is any, but the port itself is 5678. Okay, give it something meaningful. Do an add. Once the rule has been updated, you should be able to sign in using port 5678 or whichever port you have entered as a preferred port. Let me continue on this. Okay. So before we use the GitHub project, okay, from Regit, there are some dependencies which we will need. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and install Python. This requires me to do sudo. Okay. Let's do apt-get. Let's install Python first. Okay. Then we'll install daemon and paramiko. Okay, it complains to say, okay, it can't be done. Next, we'll install Python pip. apt-get update, which is also complain. So probably we need to do something apt-get update. Okay, and then try again. Okay, now this works. Okay, while this is installing, let me show you the project which we are going to use. This is a project which is called password for SSH intruders transferred to text. What it is doing is running a service on Python which listens to port 22. So instead of a SSH server which is listening on port 22, this is going to replace the service listening to port 22 and capture things like the password, the user ID, and IP address, and some other information such as the client which is trying to connect into your server using the SSH protocol. So if we just go ahead, okay, this is almost done. Let's carry on looking at the output which this project gives is a JSON format. Okay, so every attacks is separated by a different line. Okay. So if I go back, okay, this is done. I'll do a git clone on my home directory. Okay. I'll go into the directory itself, do a list. Okay, you can see that it's running on Python. Okay. The next thing I can do immediately would be to start running the service. Right. If I go ahead and run it, okay, it complains to say, okay, there's no paramiko. Previously, when I tried to install paramiko, remember Python pip was not installed, right? So I will try to install both daemon and paramiko. Okay, give it a while. And then try to run this again. Okay, if I hit enter, okay, you'll see that it's running as a process. If I go ahead and do a list directory, you will be able to see there is a new file called password.json. Let's do a tail password.json. Okay, there's nothing. So now I need to simulate a failed entry. Okay, using port 22. Remember, we have changed the port to the real port to 5678, right? So I'll go ahead, okay, in terminal, open a new SSH, okay, Azure user, add, let me quickly copy the IP address of my machine, which is over here, virtual machine, public IP address, hit back, okay, and I hit enter, right? It says, okay, there's something funky going on with the virtual machine, but I still want to access it. So in this case, instead of deleting, I'll just quickly use putty. Okay, I'll paste the address, open. Okay, I'll say yes. I'll log in as test user, and then the password I'll type in test. If I hit enter, okay, it says access denied. The default behavior of pshitt is that you'll deny all the requests. So if I keep typing test, okay, you'll just decline. If I take a look, if I do a tail password again, you will see these are the entries which I have placed. Okay, so this is great. Okay, so now I have a JSON file which is sitting there. But the next thing I would like to do is really to extract all this JSON into a structured database or put it into a visualization tool such as Power BI. Okay. The next step which I want to do will be to read the log file and then push them into a service bus. Head over to my GitHub page and look for the repository SSH Honeypot log sender. This is a project which I have created in Python to send JSON objects into two types of queues. You have one which is the traditional service bus on Azure, and the other one is eventhub. So after you do a git clone, you can use the code editor of your choice. For me, I prefer to use Visual Studio Code. If you're interested, you can download Visual Studio Code over here. So if I go over to Azure, I will start to create an eventhub. So I'll go ahead, create it. Probably I'll put it in the same resource group. Okay, namespace, I will call this as SSH Honeypot Service Bus 1. Put it close to me, which is in Southeast Asia. Use basic tier. Okay, throughput unit 1 is fine. Okay, I'll leave this as default. Leave this as default, and then create it. Okay, let's head over to extract some of the values that we need to input. So under eventhub, look for the shared access policy. Okay, you can use the default policy, which is root manage shared access key. Okay, I'll just go ahead and say the key name is root manage shared access key. Okay, the name of the eventhub is going to be the service bus name. Okay, and then the key value. Okay, click on this. It's going to give you a primary key. If I go ahead, paste the primary key. Let's try it again. Primary key, paste. Yep. And then the event hub name, it can be anything that you want it to name. My event hub. Walking you through what this code does, you create and instantiate a service bus client. Okay, create a new event hub if it does not exist, and then by default read the password.json. In this project, I've included a sample password.json so you can test it locally. The great thing about Visual Studio Code is that it allows you to do stepping through. Okay, you'll use a watermark technique, okay, to keep reading a log, okay, from bottom up. Okay, and then over here, these are some of the logic. If I want to test it locally, I can just do F5. Okay, say I want to run the current active file. Okay, and then it will allow me to read the password.json. Okay, the cool thing is that it allows me to set breakpoints. Okay, so that I can step through one by one. Okay, once I'm happy with the result, okay, the next thing is I'll just copy this. I'll go back to terminal. Okay, go back to the same directory where password.json is residing, and I'll do a nano of a new file. I'll probably call this log file reader.py. I'll paste this. Okay, save it, and then exit. And the last part I'll do is to run this python. Okay, now it's complaining that there are some dependencies which I have not installed, which is Azure Service Bus. Okay, I will try to run pip install event hub. Okay, and then try to run the log file again. Okay, let's try to do Azure Service Bus. Okay, I'll just paste this over here. Okay, and then run this again. Okay, so what this is doing now is sending the telemetry over to Event Hub. If I just pop over back to Azure, look for Event Hub, okay, you should see that he has created a new Event Hub for me, okay, which is called My Event Hub. Okay, over the bottom, you should be able to see the messages that is being sent over. Okay, so for this case, okay, it's starting to send the telemetry in. Now, for a start, you might realize it will take a while for the brute force attack to come in. One of the tricks that you can do is that you can attach multiple IP address to the same virtual machine. Let me show you. Okay, over at virtual machine, if I go back to the same virtual machine, which is this, okay, under networking, okay, under the network interface card, you will be able to do additional IP address assignment to the same network interface card. So if I go ahead and say add a new IP address, I'll just call this an IP config 2, okay, associate a new IP address with it. Okay, so if I go ahead, say create IP config 2, this will assign me a new IP address to the same virtual machine. Okay, once this has been assigned, alright, we want to copy the private IP address, okay, and utilize it over here. So for this case, it will be 4, 5. The Linux machine itself does not realize that there is additional IP address associated with it. So the part to instantiate it will be, let me stop this for a while. To create a file under your netplane directory, okay, Let me just do a sudo. Okay, paste this. Alright. For every additional IP configuration that you add in, you need to add in the additional IP address. Okay, I'll do a save. And then I will apply it using netplan apply. I will do a sudo. Alright. So if I try to SSH in using this IP address, I should be able to go in. So if I open up a new shell, SSH Azure user add this. Okay. If I want to test it, I'll use 22. But if I want to do administration, I'll do 5678 -p. Okay, type in the password. Okay, there, I'm in. Just let this run. Right. So to show you that it's sending telemetry, I will do a failed login. Over at party. Okay. Okay. So if I hit it, okay, you'll say test. If I say 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, notice that this mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4 instead. Okay. So end of the day, if you need to secure your box when creating a virtual machine on any cloud providers, not just Azure, make sure that you use the network security group and restrict the IP address that can come in to your machine. So for this case, port 22. Okay. Instead of allowing this source from any, okay, use an IP address and then put your home direct IP address. Okay, so, but for example, I'll just put 1.1.1.1 and I do a save. Okay, this will restrict all the traffic that's coming in which does not come from the IP address 1.1.1.1 to access your SSH server. Okay, if you're interested to find out more about displaying all this data, okay, putting them into a data store such as SQL and displaying them using a visualization tool such as Power BI, check out the next video. Thanks for watching.